You paid for dinner last time, and the time before that. Not because you offered, because by the time the bill came, somehow the conversation had shifted. They mentioned something hard they were going through, something stressful, something unfair that happened to them, and you just picked it up. You didn't even think about it. That's the thing. You never do. There's a person, you already know who, where every single plan ends up being about them. You call to talk about something you're dealing with. 15 minutes in, you're listening to their problems. Your thing never got brought up, and somehow you feel guilty for even wanting to talk about it. You've left that conversation feeling responsible for their mood. You've rearranged your schedule so they don't get upset. You've swallowed things you needed to say because you already knew how they'd respond. And every single time, you called it being a good friend. Machiavelli watched people operate for decades. Court, politics, backroom deals, public betrayals, and the pattern he kept coming back to wasn't about the powerful. It was about the ones who never seemed powerful, but somehow always got what they wanted. He called it controlling the narrative. We call it something else. We call it being supportive, being patient, being there. But sometimes, and this is the part nobody wants to say out loud, being there isn't something you chose. It's something you were maneuvered into. Here's a real example, plain and simple. You have a friend, good person, been through a lot, genuinely struggled, and early on, you were happy to be there. That felt right. But then something shifted. It became every week, then every few days. Then anytime you tried to create a boundary like saying you were busy or you couldn't talk right now, they didn't get angry. They got quiet. That specific kind of quiet that makes you feel like you did something wrong. So you called back. You explained yourself. You made time you didn't have. And they never asked you to. That's the part that confuses people. They never demanded anything. They just made you feel like a bad person for not giving it. That's not neediness. That's leverage. Machiavelli's most underrated idea, the one people skip because it sounds too dark, is this: weakness, performed consistently, is a form of power, not real weakness. Performed weakness. The person who is always the victim in every story they tell, always wronged, always overlooked, always dealt the bad hand. That person has built something. They've built a version of themselves that nobody can challenge without looking cruel. You can't argue with someone who's suffering. You can't set a limit with someone who's already fragile. You can't say, actually, that's not what happened to someone who's already crying. So you don't. And they know you won't. Think about the last time you tried to have an honest conversation with someone like this. Not a fight, just honest. You said something true, something fair, something another person would have just sat with. And within 2 minutes, the conversation had completely flipped. Now you're explaining your tone. Now you're defending your intentions. Now you're apologizing for something you're not even sure you did. Your original point? Gone. You didn't lose that conversation because you were wrong. You lost it because they're better at reframing than you are at holding a line. Here's another one. Group of friends. Someone in the group is always going through something. And look, life is hard. Things happen. That's real. But notice the timing. Every time there's a group decision that doesn't center them, every time the plan doesn't go their way, something comes up, something difficult, something that needs attention, and suddenly the group is reorganizing around it. Not because anyone decided to, but because nobody wanted to be the person who didn't care. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns don't repeat by accident. The victim identity, and I want to be careful here, because not everyone who struggles is doing this, but the chronic victim identity has one main function. It removes accountability. If everything bad in your life is someone else's fault, you never have to look at your own role. You never have to change. You never have to sit with the uncomfortable version of events where you contributed to the problem. The story stays clean. They suffered. Others caused it. End of story. Every time. And here's what Machiavelli would say about that. He'd say that story is a weapon. Not always a conscious one, but a weapon. Because the moment you try to introduce a different version, the moment you gently suggest, well, maybe you also played a part in this, you become the enemy. Not because you were wrong, because you threatened the story. There's a specific kind of guilt these people produce that's different from normal guilt. Normal guilt comes from doing something wrong. This guilt comes from doing nothing wrong at all. You didn't attack them. You didn't abandon them. You just had needs of your own. You just had a day where you couldn't show up. You just for once put yourself first. And that was enough. That was enough for the quiet withdrawal, the one-word replies, the no, it's fine, don't worry about it. That clearly means the opposite. And instead of thinking, wait, this isn't fair, you chased them, you over-explained, you made it right, because the alternative felt worse. That alternative, the guilt, the tension, the sense that you damaged something, that feeling is the leash. They didn't create it on purpose, maybe, but they use it, every time. Machiavelli wrote about something called the appearance of virtue. His point was dark but honest. People respond to how you seem, not always to who you are. The chronic victim has, without reading a word of political philosophy, understood this completely. They seem like the one who suffers. They seem like the one who tries. They seem like the one who's always on the receiving end of someone else's cruelty or neglect. And because they've been telling that story to mutual friends, to family, to anyone who will listen for long enough, it becomes the accepted version. So when you finally say something, when you finally name the pattern, you're not just arguing with them. You're arguing with every person they got to first. That's not an accident. That's strategy. Conscious or not, it's strategy. Here's the part that actually hurts. Some of these people are genuinely suffering. The pain is real. The difficult past is real. The hard experience is real. But there's a difference between someone who went through something and is trying to heal, and someone who went through something and built their entire identity around never having to be responsible for anything ever again. One of them is wounded. The other is using the wound as a permanent excuse. And the tragedy is, they can't heal. Not really. Because healing would require admitting that they have agency, that they have a role, that they're not just a leaf being blown around by other people's decisions. That admission is too costly, so they stay exactly where they are, and they make sure you stay there with them. Look, this is what Machiavelli actually understood about power that most people refuse to accept. The most control in a room doesn't belong to the loudest person. It doesn't belong to the most aggressive. It belongs to the person whose pain everyone else feels responsible for. Because that person doesn't have to do anything. Everyone else is already adjusting, already softening, already calculating how to not make things worse. That's control. Total, invisible, deniable control. And you've been living inside it, maybe for years, while calling it loyalty. Here's a question, an honest one. How many conversations have you not had? Real conversations, things that needed to be said, because you already knew how they'd respond. How many times have you edited yourself down before you even opened your mouth? How many plans have you changed? How many things have you dropped? How many times have you absorbed something that wasn't yours to carry? Because the alternative was dealing with their reaction. That's not love, that's management. You became their emotional manager, without a job offer, without a contract. And somehow you've been doing it for free, paying in your time, your energy, your silence, and wondering why you feel so drained around someone who supposedly cares about you. There's an exhaustion that comes specifically from this dynamic. Not the tiredness of hard work, not even the tiredness of a hard day. It's the exhaustion of constant low-level performance, of always being on, of always monitoring. Are they okay? Did I say the wrong thing? Is this going to become a thing? That monitoring takes more out of you than most people realize, because it never stops. Even when you're not with them, you're already thinking about them, planning around them, carrying them in the back of your mind. That's not a friendship. That's a full-time responsibility you never agreed to. Machiavelli, near the end of The Prince, makes a point about self-deception. He says the most dangerous thing a person can do is lie to themselves about the nature of what they're dealing with. Because you can't navigate terrain you refuse to see clearly. And most people in this situation, most people who are exhausted, drained, vaguely guilty without knowing why, they see it. Some part of them already sees it. They just keep giving it a softer name. Patience, understanding, being the bigger person, seeing it clearly doesn't make you cruel. It just means you've stopped pretending. So here's where this lands. There's someone you know exactly who, and you've been adjusting yourself around them for longer than you should have. And somewhere underneath all the patience and the loyalty and the I just care about them, there's a quieter thought you haven't let yourself finish, that this isn't sustainable, that this isn't actually helping them, that you've been so busy managing their suffering that you stopped asking whether any of this is actually your responsibility to carry. Their pain might be real. What they went through might be real. But real pain doesn't give someone the right to make you feel guilty for having a life. It doesn't give them the right to your peace. And here's the thing Machiavelli would say, the thing nobody in your life is going to say to you clearly, the moment you stop carrying it, they'll find someone else who will. Which means it was never really about you, it was about the role, and you've been filling it perfectly. So the question isn't whether they've suffered. The question is, when did you decide that their suffering was your sentence, and what would happen if you just stopped serving it?